day after winning Car of the Year in 2001, this video was made for internal presentations, and it was a presentation that was used to make LD company feel the pride for those who developed the car, and not only this car was a car that was projected towards the future. So starting from the car of the year, it would have been launched on the market and stayed on the market for 10 years with an incredible commercial success. Today, as always, we need the help of someone else to tell you this story, and we call the help of two professional persons. Alberto Sabatini is a great journalist in motorsports, member of the jury of the Car of the Year, and he will tell us what this car made in order to win that prize, and which were the strong points and how the market welcomed the car, and many other things. The other guest, both are here virtually, is, well, hi Alberto. Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. The other one is Mr. Domenico Martino, who at the time was the head of the project of 147. He saw this car see the light, and he will tell us some anecdotes. So I'm sure you will be very curious. But let's get back to our presentation. First of all, let's start from the 147 as it was born. We know it was presented in 2000, but actually its origin dates back to many years before. Actually, 156 and 147 were developed almost simultaneously, and some prototypes of 147 already existed before the presentation of 156 in 97, so the history is quite long. But let's get immediately to the Car of the Year. Alberto, how does it work? What are the parameters that you consider? Well, the Car of the Year is considered the most important prize for the automobile industry. There are many awards that are given, and they imitate the Car of the Year, but the Car of the Year award with the yellow brand that you've seen that changed over the years graphically a little bit is considered the most important, the most authoritative in the history of the car. So the cars which win this award have always been bestsellers in sales and have always been successful cars. So the strength of this award is that it is given by a jury of 60, this year 61 journalists from all over the world. These are independent journalists, not linked to automobile brands, so their opinion is independent, and these come from 23 European countries. 6 journalists are Italians, I am one of them, and these journalists express, well, the great strength of this prize is that the jurors express their vote publicly. It is held in Geneva at the Motor Show Geneva, and they motivate their ranking, so their score. So you are not hidden behind anonymity. So every journalist is responsible of its comments and the notes that they give. So the analysis of the cars is very deep, and we devote a lot of time to analyzing the cars, comparing them, and for this reason it is considered very important and serious. Alfa 147 won in 2001. It was one of the greatest victories, because usually the car winning the car of the year has a little bit of advantage. Apart from a few years ago, there were 2 ties, but in the case of 147, there was just 3 points. of advantage. Well, sometimes there's a huge difference between the first and the second one. And this means that at the time there were important cars. There were 10 finalists at the time. There was also Toyota Prius, which was very interesting for the hybrid technology. There was Opel Corsa, Classe C. So all cars having important assets, and Alfa 147 won and won the votes of 8 journalists, which ranked it first place, but especially convinced most of the jurors because it was the car that, with German, English, Spanish, or French journalists, obtained, if not the most important ranking, the second or third in all the categories. So on the average, it reached a lot of recognition. Why it is important, this award, and why 147 deserved it? Because having jurors from 23 different countries, each country tends to express their preference according to the automobile culture of their country. For us, well, the Italians pay attention to the design. We consider it very important. Maybe Germans pay more attention to the mechanical part. French journalists to the versatility of the car and how you stay in the car. Northern cultures pay attention to the eco-friendliness. So having the car obtaining the maximum of good ranks in all the countries means having a car having global characteristics. And 147 won thanks to these qualities. If you want, I can read the motivation. Can I? Yes, sure, go on. So I translate from English just by reading. 147 is impressive for its design, which is a mix of retro and solidity, with clear and evident Alfa DNA in its lines. The easiness to drive derived from the quality of the chassis of 156. Alfa Romeo A147 offers a high level of quality and a rich inside. The only two weak points, the capacity of the hood and the space of the back seats. Initially, the version with 3 doors and select speed shift were then accompanied by a 5 doors and a diesel engine. So Alfa Romeo 147 won because it reminded a little bit of 156, which won 3 years before the same title, the Car of the Year, and everyone liked it because in all its characteristics, apart from a little critique on the hood and the back seats, convinced all the European jurors. I repeat, 60 jurors from all over Europe. Thank you. But let's try to understand the origin of the 147. First of all, the 147 inherits in a single car what the 145 and 146 declined in 2 variants, so with 2 different silhouettes, 3 doors and 5 doors. 145 and 146 represented even more than what simply was seen on the market. 145 and 146 signed the transition between the Boxer engine and the twin spark new generation engines. And from the point of view of style, for the first time, they revolutionized the line of the 33 and before of Alfa Sud. And in general, 147 enters a C segment that for Alfa Romeo was still quite recent, because the real debut of Alfa Romeo in segment C was with another car that we talk about this year in the Backstage, which is Alfa Sud, which was presented in 1971 at the Turin Road Show. Before, there was another Alfa Romeo developed in Milan and then in Arese, and the smallest car had always been a segment D, so compact Giulietta, then Giulia. and then Alfetta with another segment, higher one. But these were traditional cars with front engine and back traction, and every time we tried to offer something smaller, a different road was taken. We know that the first idea of a small Alfa Romeo was born already in 1934 with the Type 1 4C 1500, which never saw the light. And then the post-war period, it was talked about with the V project, a small Alfa Romeo. There were projects for 10, 12 years. And when the Type 103 that we talked about a couple of years ago during the Backstage was almost ready to launch production, Alfa Romeo takes another step forward and prefers to produce the Renault by license, which covered the missing segment. The same thing happened a couple of years after, and then again under license the R4 is produced. So the small Alfa Romeo has a long story that will only be realized in 1971 with Alfa Sud, which was and still is considered the most the best seller of Alfa Romeo, with almost 1 million cars sold. Runner-up, we have the 33. The 33 will not arrive, will not overpass the Alfa Sud, but will exceed the sport wagon. So the C segment, which was born late in Pomigliano d'Arco with Alfa Sud, which was born by creating a strong divide for Alfa Romeo, then became the backbone of the market of Alfa Romeo. So 147, when it started to be created, it was conceived with a great sense of responsibility because it was a car that had to support the company. 156 managed to make a turning point in those years. It broke the schemes from the point of view of design. It became a point of reference from the point of view of handling. It brought the turbo diesel common rate at its debut, so it had to prove nothing after a few years already. But 147 had to consolidate that trend and had to be a bestseller, able to support the company. So I imagine the responsibility of those who then had to work on that project, having to work on a car that had to cost less than 156, be smaller, but should not be totally different from those values that the 156 determined in terms of a design, pleasure of driving, performances, and other things. And then 147 debuts, and this is the first presentation video. So you see the Fiat 25R, which is sacrificed, makes me feel a bit sorrow. But okay, 147 was presented, and as Alberto said before, its design is very solid because it's a car which was born with the sports side, but also has vintage takes. You all know the two lines and the position of the lights, echoing the Villa d'Este. Even today, after 20 years and 80 years from the Villa d'Este, Alfa tends to repeat, so the design of Alfa Romeo continues to be repeated and be inspired by tradition. But if you look at from close up, the 147 hides a lot of inspiration from the tradition, from the heritage, and the design center working on 156, 147, but then on 166 and the others, puts together a method of working which is prepared to always look in the archives. So not doing the new Juliet, the new Giulietta, on the contrary, by designing modern cars which have the pride of its DNA and tradition, and from time to time can use some details like the lines, the lights, many other details. 147 or also the Giulietta Sprint V-shaped back window. But this has a lot of mechanical sides too. So, but let's make a short step backwards. These are drawings that are then published and that portray the car, which is stylized but is also in its final form. If you look in the archives of the design center, you find other drawings that in certain cases are partly in digital form and anticipate by 2 or 3 years the presentation of the car. But if we look at the back and the side, we see the development of the versions with 3 and 5 doors. So leaving aside the experience made with 145 and 146 with the two different cars, in this case 147 is developed thinking about the two versions from the beginning. But if we continue, we find the first maquettes in 1:1 scale. Here you see the details, and we already recognize a lot of the 147. You see? Would you recognize it? Okay, and now, question. Do you think that this and this image too date back to which year? These are from December 1994. So when in reality the 145 and 146 were debuting and 156 had to see the light yet, there was a certain physiognomy of 147, both outside and inside. Initially, the internal part were conceived in different ways with a very light tunnel, but we also started talking about infotainment, so the need of having big screens. So the inside changes shape. Then we have the instruments on the 147, which are covered, and we start to see the shape of 147 as a chapter of a more complex project, talking about redesigning the brand, not only redesigning the model, but as we've seen with the Car of the Year award, 147 convinced since the beginning also for its performances, which is typically Alfa Romeo, and continues the 156 legacy. And talk about this, we cannot talk about the suspensions, as you can see, the front and the back ones. And then let's see the real design stage. I would like to ask Domenico something. Welcome, Domenico. Hi. So first things first, physically, did you get the prize of the Car of the Year? Yes, I was there together with all the team. It was an incredible moment. I remember we were a lot, but not many know that the history of 147 was not so nice in the beginning. Personally, in 1997 was responsible for performances of the cars. Performances, it means from safety to engines to CX to tests, right, road tests, comfort. And we had to create a car that had to respect certain budgets. But it was difficult for an Alfa Romeo to stay in some budgets because we already launched 157 not long before. So I had to work on this hard, and we presented in September 1997 the car to Cantarella. I remember it very well. The archetype of the car had suspensions which were McPherson in the front and the BLG at the back. So at the time, they built also three mock-up cars, but 25 years have passed. So three prototypes, but one, well, the first one was not performing, it wasn't very well, was not behaving very well. Also, the calculations were not respecting the standards. So, for example, this part was unbalanced with also risks. So, anyway, we presented the car to Cantarella. Cantarella, after our presentation, looked at us in the eyes and helped us. He helped us because he just finished the presentation of 156, and with his hands he drew the shape of the 156 and told us, this is the 156. You cut it in half and you shorten it. At that point, I was relieved because that meant McPherson at the back, great acceleration towards the development of the car. So this is an aspect that I wanted to tell you because many years have passed now. So Mr. Cantarella helped us a lot. Of course, the McPherson at the back, derived from the 156, immediately had a series of problems linked to the comfort of the car, because there were many details that were very stiff, and some parts were not very stiff. But thanks to some persons of the team, like Mr. Tosetti, we were able to respect both the handling parameters and the noise parameters. And talk about handling, there were two more people in the team who were important. One, Mr. Travaglio, who maybe someone reminds for the handling setup. So all the stiffnesses of the elements, he was responsible of all these things. So there's a trade-off between the comfort and the handling. And then Mr. Krief, today he works at Ferrari. At the time, he just arrived from Japan after 6 years with Michelin. And it was him who brought in-house, at the beginning he was very shy, but he brought in the calculation models for tires that were used by Michelin. And thanks to this development of these calculation models, the setup of ABS and BDC well, gave incredible results. Then suspensions, well, the McPherson at the back, I remember it very well. I remember that it was excellent. So the more you loaded it on the back, the better it was. I remember when we took part to the ALK test and Alfa won at 105 kilometers per hour, while the other cars, I remember, struggled. And one also went off-road because it was very high. Anyway, well, I can tell you some anecdotes, even personal stories. Well, the platform, contrary to the 156, was developed in Turin. I remember that my team, with a dozen of engineers, well, sorry, Lorenzo, I was not the head of the project of the 147. It was Mr. Aldo Dragotti. I was the team leader of the performance, so the person responsible for the performances of the car. Anyway, the platform was in Turin, and I personally didn't like the fact that the platform had to be in Turin, so every day I went back to Arese, but I was always the first to arrive at the office in Turin and the last one to go away at night. Of course, you had to drive on the highway. At the time, I used 100 exist 2000 where there were no speed limits. Well, there were speed limits, but there were no checks. Yes, actually, the first one for six, I broke it. The second one, I broke it again. Just to tell you that I went back and forth from Turin to Arese at high speed. The other important point of the platform was in Pomigliano. So, 6 months before the starting of the production, almost all the platform of Turin was transferred to Pomigliano, trying to solve all those problems of process that usually are present before day one. 147, anyway, was the front runner for certain technological solutions. For example, those who were thermo-expandables. Not many know that inside the car, in some parts, there are sort of sponges that at 180 degrees expand and seal, close all the noises that can be heard inside. But the 147, well, they had these elements, these tools mounted on aluminum supports. And with the heat of the summer, I remember in Pomigliano, it was a hot summer, they dilated, and so there was a friction. Sometimes there were also noises with the cars which standed still. So these are just anecdotes that come to my mind randomly. I remember that in order to do the diagnosis on these thermo-expandables, we had to sacrifice a couple of cars, which then could not be used anymore. Maybe, can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you. So the question that I want to ask is, we were talking about how the 147, which risks to become a Libra, then had a physiognomy by its own, and drivability and Alfa Romeo performances 20 years ago, but I would say even today. What was the importance of these characteristics of the market? A lot, definitely. Because both in the assessment of the car from the jurors of the car of the year and also in the perception of the people, they were heavy, they were important, even more than today, because today the first thing you pay attention to is eco-friendliness of the car, CO2 emissions, compliance with the norms. So there was a proliferation of sport utilities, crossovers, but in the past, the drivability, the handling, a term invented summarizing the handling and drivability of a car was very, very important, both for the Italian audience and also for European ones. Germans voted the 147, well, the jurors, because it had a great handling. Despite there was also a German car like the Mercedes C-Class at the time, which was beaten by the Alfa. So the value of the victory of Alfa 147 in the car of the year and its commercial success in Italy and only in Italy was given by also the level of its competitors. 147 beat the Toyota Prius, as I said, the first hybrid car, Audi A2, which is no longer here today, but it was the first car which tried to be efficient with small tires, low consumptions. The Mercedes, the Class C, and the Opel Corsa, as well as the Peugeot, etc. So 147 is a car which convinced everyone. And then its design, well, I would say, was breathtaking and timeless because it's still beautiful. It was beautiful for many, many years and it still is. We know the design of the cars sometimes gets old rapidly. 147 was beautiful car, just like the 156. And I would like to add something more. Following the words of Mr. Martino, he said about Philip Kriev, the person who was in his team and worked on the 147. Well, Philip Kriev then went to Ferrari, but then Marchionne asked him to create the Giulia. The Giulia that we see today was made by Kriev and his team, who brought back the concept of the different suspensions and the sequence of drivability and the feeling, the driving feeling of the Giulia, which is considered the best in its category. Thank you. You're welcome. Well, continuing with our presentation, there's another a novelty, at least for Alfa Romeo. The stability control, which on the 147 debuts from the beginning, and it was a great innovation, Domenico. But was that a headache to introduce the electronic system, the 147? Yes, I would say that it was the first experience, and as I said before, the fact that Kriev set the development of these security systems by using these new models of calculations that at Alfa Romeo were unknown. So I thank Philip once again. Well, it didn't create a lot of problems afterwards. We did the tests from Spain to Sweden to Italy, but then it was very good. Well, keep in account the fact that at the time the planning also went through testing. Today, many things are done virtually or with dynamic simulators and a platform indoor. Before, everything went through the back of the test driver, who was a very important voice. Today, a little bit less, I would say. So it was the back of the test driver which helped the technicians to better set all the parameters. The right wheel, left wheel, brakes, pressure. So, Lorenzo, there were not huge problems, I must say, in the end. And then I realized that, well, I was with Philip Kriev on the Giulia project, which was wonderful. It was my last project, and I enjoyed it a lot. I had some fun because, as Alberto Sabatini was saying, it was a great thing. I hope that many other Alfa like Giulia and Stelvio will come out. I hope it, but it's also true that the quality and performances then are made by people as well. And I trust young people. I interrupted you before you were telling me about the Silva, because the 147, from the point of view of design, has many fathers, no father. It was born in what is considered by outside the transition period. Yes, yes, it's true. But to be honest, I always had next to me in the platform Edgar, who was, I don't know if people know him. Edgar was the helper of the Silva for the first time create mathematic models of the drawings that usually was made with a pencil by the drawers. He knew very well the CAD, so he could reproduce the lines of the pencil on the CAD. De Silva, who was the supervisor at the time, did not agree with the head, with the boss of the platform on the design of the car, but he was not an alpha man. He came from Brazil, Turin, so they clashed on certain style points that I don't remember very well now because 25 years have gone by. But I remember that he took his pencil, put it in a brown envelope with written outside Fiat Auto. He put a card in it with written, well, I was not there, but I was told this, and I believe it. And now you draw it by yourself. And this was sent to the boss of the platform, which was then changed. So you can imagine how De Silva also had the power to express in this way. With a pencil and a card, he summarized the spirit at the moment of the car. Egger then took back the concept of the Silva and continued with 147 as you see it. But with the Silva, well, I have another anecdote that I would like to share with you. Because with him, we had to define how to create the shift lever. So in terms of size, design, etc. We were not talking about the details of the design. I was just asked to express a concept on the handliness of the grip, and so the tip of the lever was just like spherical, just like the Audi ones. So we defined the diameter and we started a pre-series. Well, with job one, with these shifts that were realized, like this knob, with the numbers of the shifts that were engraved on an aluminum plate, which was beautiful. We called it gem. This aluminum gem, under the sun of Pomigliano in the preparation of the press cars, became like fire. So you couldn't touch it with your hand. Sometimes there were people who went in the car and they went back without changing gear because it was impossible to touch the knob. I don't know if you see it. Otherwise, you would have had an engraving on your hand. But luckily, when production started, the real production started in Monte Carlo, this gem was replaced with a lighter plate in plastics, and this problem was solved. Another aspect that is part of the experimentation of us driving the car every day was the SAT. SAT was the system that allowed us to check the wear and tear of the friction, because 147 was also the field of experimentation in these systems. It was not easy to set up this system that allows, with the wear and tear of the disc, to always have the internal mechanism in the same position, so the customer would never perceive the higher load under the pedal with the wear and tear of the friction. So this was an incredible experience, which I remember very dearly. Then another aspect that deserves to be told is the seat conception. Well, the seat was very peculiar before that with the 156. It was not like the 147. There was another concept. The concept was of a seat like a bench, while in the 147 I wanted a more sports seat with the H point, the sitting point, very low, very enveloping, and I had to fight a lot with the person responsible with ergonomy at the time, who also was half my height, was not as tall as me at all. So I had to convince him that also tall people should drive the car, and after a while we managed to have an agreement working on the stiffness of the foams of the seat. So there's many anecdotes, but now it's very long. Yes, but we will listen to them. Well, the internal part of 147 marked a profound gap compared to what came before 145, 146, in terms of design and materials and finishings. So 156 and 147 were awarded because after 20 years, without being a vintage car, they still attract the passion of the audience. Yes, definitely, definitely. It was a car with a great longevity, incredible. And I only regret something, but there was the Giulietta then, who received the heritage of that. I don't know if in the future the Stellantis group will continue with the concept of the compact C segment, or will change towards the crossover cars like it is needed today to meet the needs of the audience that wants more volume and more comfort. But the 147 was a car that for the first 10 years and even more satisfied the needs of many drivers in terms of handling and also performances. I remember it had also a good experience in the sports categories, where the 156 won for years, but also 147 was a good competitor, proving that it was an excellent performing car. As Mr. Martino said, it's a 156 shortened at the back. So it was a car that satisfied all its customers. 147 in the beginning, with its lines, its performances, and its inside, debuts with a 3-door model only. In reality, the 5 doors is presented immediately after, but Alfa Romeo wants to underline this novelty, also with an advertisement which today we would consider risky. So offering immediately after a version with 5 doors was not a detail. We saw 145, 146 with two different models. At the time, having 3 or 5 doors was not so widespread on the C segment, but Alfa decided to not give up to the sportiness of the 3 doors, as it was done later with the Giulietta, which only had 5 doors, but also to give some attention to the handling. And as you know, the hood and the back seats were not strong points of the 147. Another element of the modernity of 147 was the fact that since the beginning it was thought with the infotainment system that today we are used to have. We give it for granted, but at the time it was still at the beginning. And maybe if you remember, this was done through the Connect. So you inserted a telephone SIM in a like credit card size, just like you had a telephone SIM. It was a quite complex system at the beginning, but then Alfa Romeo puts it in the 147 even before other cars and dedicates a commercial to
Previsioni
them.
meteo? Previsioni meteo? La strada senza traffico? Il tragitto più breve. Chiedi 147. Alfa 147 versione esclusiva Connect. La telematica diventa di serie.
Domenico, I know these were not important things for those who dealt with performance, but all these innovations, these new solutions, had an impact on your job. But there was a specific department for that, so all these tests were carried out by them. And in terms of my team and my group, I was not involved in this. I know that these devices were also were put just before the launch of production, because you have just a short time to do the final fine tuning and setup. You need to have everything fixed. Even if you do a lot of tests at different timings, I know that some groups worked a lot on it, but many years have passed. I don't remember. I don't remember the details. I don't remember if they had problems. I don't know. I was focused on the handling and on the other performances. We'll talk about performances of the car, not with the first series, but a few years afterwards, the Alfa Romeo 147 would prove for real on the track its capacity of being better than the competitors. So some years pass, it's 2004, and I'm not talking about a competition car, but a 1600 twin spark. It is, well, not prepared, but simply set up and participates in the 24 hours of Misano. It was a test organized by the Auto magazine. Alberto Samatini, unfortunately, is not here with us, but it compared the C segment cars, the 1600 twin spark in this case, won over all its competitors. So the BMW Series 1, the Golf, and all the others complete these 24 hours detached by a lot. Domenico, you participated in the preparation of that test, or simply you did a good job before. We did a good job before because in that period I already went to work on a 159 with my team, so we were developing the new car. So in the platform, we work on the car that has to be launched at least 1 year after the production, and then you immediately go work on other projects. And on in that year, I was already working on the 159. So I didn't directly set up the car, but I was confident that a good initial setup, so all the technical details like the steering, as well as the tires, as well as the suspensions. Well, these were all elements that I was confident would make it a great car. And then the back was very reactive, as I told you. The more you load it in terms of weight, the more the car is fixed on the ground. So we did a good job in the beginning. So the audience, I think, can testify this. Well, the 147, as Alberto Sabatini was saying before, was a little bit sacrificed in its sports activities, in part because the regulations prefer the D segment cars, and because the 156 had one of the most brilliant sports careers. It lasted 10 years, and they conquered 13 championships of teams, pilots, brands, and developers, and that 156 wins in 2007 after it was retired from production, and almost won a European championship. So it was hard to find its place in this, but at the time of the presentation, so we get back to our presentation now. Since the beginning, the picture, there was no renderings, there were dummies at the time of the 147 super production, because while the sports career in championships like Super Turismo, etc., was won by 156, the 147 was the protagonist of other lesser categories, especially in a mono-brand championship, which lasted years, and the award was 156 for the European Turismo category. So the 147 had the possibility to express in that context its potential. Do you remember this one, Domenico? Yes, yes. It was presented for the first time in Monaco, and first row with all the other cars. For the journalists, it was wonderful. It filled you with joy just by looking at it. It was 2000. Yes, 2000. October, September. No, maybe October 2000. So today we talked about the origins of this car, and over a 10 years period, many versions were alternated. The 147 GTA for sure, which represented the most important one, probably with 6 cylinders under the hood. And then we had a facelift of the outside and a series of special versions, among which the Q2 with the front differential, self-locking, which set new standards in drivability. GTA Q2, can you tell us something about that? Well, the GTA, the V6 engine had an incredible sound. The car was a sort of a go-kart. It was really a go-kart, ready, extremely ready, responding very well to the accelerator pedal. The stiffness was perfect. The suspensions were on point, 250 horses. I remember that when I went to Turin, I was flying. I was flying.
Qui però c'è l'appassionato, non l'ingegnere.
But you are not an engineer now. It's not the engineer speaking. It's the man. Yes, but the car was particularly light. Maybe the only thing was the seating. The seating was too stiff. I could not adapt perfectly to that. But after the toll booth of Ghisolfa, of the highway, there's a slight bump that you can take at maximum speed if no one is there, and a couple of times I perceived I was off the ground. That's it. So a part racing on the A4 highway, like competition with the fast train, well, that differential that was not on the GTA. How was it then mounted on the Q2, which was a small turbo diesel? Well, apart from the fact that the team of the 147 were working on that, well, it arrived with the same logic of V2, so again on the diesel it performed very well. I don't want to tell maybe the fact that the Q2 was done with Kriev, also following my indications. Just with Lorenzo, your friend Torreggiani can tell you about these details, but Torreggiani is sitting there as now is head of the maintenance of the cars of the museum. So we are talking about someone who still touches cars that everyone dreams about. Yeah, he realized, together with me, what we realized, the archetype of Q2 on a car modifying, as Torreggiani did it at 159, and just the first prototypes. So the objective, the goal was to reduce the steering in the curve, so through the ABS, the front wheel, the internal one compared to the external one, etc., 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 you can obtain, you can zero that steering effect, the understeering effect. So there were also tests on this made by journalists, English journalists, who are good drivers. And this underlined how the car still had just a little bit of this. And working with this, with Kriev, about the understeer, our team in Turin improved the Q2, but in that period I was on the 159, I was working on the 159, so I couldn't follow everything about the 147, especially the understeer element. Well, the part of presentation ends here, but the details are known by Torreggiani. You can ask him. Yes, but physically Torreggiani is here, so everyone will ask him. But before asking to Marco Torreggiani, I wanted to thank all the participants for being with us. Thank you for contribution, and thank Alberto Sabatini, who told us so many anecdotes about the car of the year.